Hello, and welcome to our session for Sitecore Symposium 2021. We're here today to show you how you can take OrderCloud worldwide, and we're going to be talking about how to handle globalized e-commerce at scale. My name is Rob Earlam, and I'm a Senior Developer Advocate with Sitecore, and I'm here today with Crhistian Ramirez, a Senior Manager on our Commerce Partner Success team. We're here today to talk about a fictional company called Sitemovebox51. They're an online retailer working in the healthcare industry, and they're currently solely operating out of the USA. They have a successful business, and they've built their headless storefront to leverage Sitecore's OrderCloud. Based on their success in the US, Sitemovebox51 have decided they want to roll out their products to other regions. They want to expand. They've done research which has shown there's a large demand for their products in other regions outside the US. Because of this, they've made the decision to roll out their product globally. They're going to go and serve these different customers in the different regions where they're needed. There's going to be quite a few problems they need to solve along the way for this. One of those being that some of these regions have strict data sovereignty laws, meaning that the data stored there has to remain within their borders. It can't be stored overseas. Today, Crhistian and myself are going to focus on three of the problems they're going to have to solve. First off, for countries which don't have those strict data sovereignty laws, they can be served out of the main Sitemovebox51 site. But to do that, we're going to need to handle each of the different currencies for each of the regions we're going to operate in. On top of that, we're also going to need to make sure we're applying local taxation laws for each jurisdiction that Sitemovebox51 is going to start to work in. Finally, we've mentioned these data sovereignty laws a few times now. We're going to need to make sure that when we work in one of these regions which have these data sovereignty laws, all of the data for that region can't leave those shores. It has to be stored within their boundaries. Now I'm going to pass you over to Crhistian, and he's going to talk through the first two of these scenarios.
Today we're going to be talking about multiple currencies. So first let's talk about why or when you would need to solve for this. Obviously your business would need to be handling multiple currencies, but additionally it would need to be handling these currencies within a single marketplace organization. Consider the following example. Let's say you have a US-based marketplace and you want to reach out into the Canadian market. And so you're not creating a new marketplace. You have that same marketplace that is now servicing both audiences, and that marketplace is handling both the US dollar and the Canadian dollar. And so in this case, this is really what this feature is meant to solve for. All right, so now that we've established that we need to solve for multiple currencies, how does OrderCloud help us solve that? Well, OrderCloud exposes a resource called a locale. And a locale has a couple of information that's relevant to us, such as language and currency. And really for our use cases, we're really only interested in currency, but language is also there if you need it. Now, the platform team does recommend that you define both currency and language using the ISO standards. Specifically for currency, it would be ISO 4217, and for language, it would actually be a composite, so ISO 639-ISO 3166. Now, you would want to do this because the idea is that you'd then be able to integrate with other third-party systems that are expecting values in that format. But really, this is just a suggestion. You can enter any kind of string value less than 100 characters. It's up to you ultimately to define meaning to that, which actually brings up a good point about the API in that it is currency agnostic. So pricing in any product that you see on OrderCloud is just going to be a numeric value. And then it's up to your application to give meaning to that. So when it's displaying the price to a buyer user during checkout, what kind of a symbol should I use for that? When a payment is being processed, what kind of currency is being attached to that? Now, a locale can be assigned to a party, either buyers or user groups. And much like most assignments in OrderCloud, assigning something to one of those parties means that any member of that party will also inherit that assignment. And that'll ultimately flow down to the individual user. Now, one thing I did want to call out is that assigning multiple locales to the same party is considered a misconfiguration, and it will yield unexpected results. So at this time, a user can only have one locale and one currency associated with them. All right, let's check out what this looks like conceptually. So here we have kind of the canonical diagram for demonstrating complex pricing in OrderCloud. On the right, we have a product, and that product is represented by two currencies, depending on who's viewing that product. Along the top, we can see that this party sees the product at a price of 10, and the party on the bottom can see the same product now at a price of 20 in a different currency. Now each party is assigned a locale, and then from that assignment, a currency is derived. Remember, currency is a property of locale. So in this case, currency A and currency B. Now the one thing we haven't really talked about yet is price schedules can also be set with a currency. So along the top, we have currency A, and then on the bottom, currency B. The API will enforce that I can only assign prices to parties that share a common currency. This prevents me as an admin from accidentally assigning a price from currency A to a party with currency B. Also, I as a user can't view pricing for products that are not in my currency. So there's actually quite a bit of enforcement granted to us just by using currency. And that's really one of the benefits of doing that. For our demo today, we'll be looking at how to implement multiple currencies by leveraging locales. Before we get started, I'd like to review some data that I set up ahead of time. I've created two buyers in this organization, an Australia buyer and a USA buyer. And within each of these buyer organizations, I've also created a single user. So we have an Australia user and a USA user. I've created a single product, product 1, and I've created two price schedules, one for each of our currencies. We have an Australia price with a price of 20 and a currency of AUD, and we have a USA price with a price of 30 and a currency of USD. All right, let's go into locales resource. So I currently don't have any locales created. That'll be one of the first things we'll need to do. So I'll go ahead and create a new locale, and I'm going to give it an ID of USA. I'll give it a currency of USD and a language of EN-US. I'll go ahead and send that request, and now I'll create my Australian currency. So I'll give that an ID of Australia, a currency of AUD, and a language of EN-AU. All right, so we now have both of our locales, but we don't have this assigned to any of our users. So if we actually go into our users and list them, we'll see that locale is still set to null. So we'll need to make sure we update that, create that assignment before we see that on the user object. So we'll go back to locales, select create or update a locale assignment, and we'll pass it an ID. We'll start with our USA locale first, and I'll assign it to the buyer ID, which is also USA. Now I could get more granular with this and actually assign it to a user group within this buyer organization, but in this case, we'll just assign it to the buyer organization as a whole. And I'll do the same for my Australia currency. All right, now that those assignments are made, we should be able to see locale flow down to the user. And we can see here locale is now on the user object. Let's go back to our product. Our product doesn't have a price associated with it yet. So we'll go ahead and create a product assignment. We'll give it the ID for product 1. Our buyer, we'll start with USA, and the price schedule which is USA_price. And actually, before I do that, I would like to demonstrate some of the validation that the OrderCloud API handles for us. So if I try to do Australia price instead, it should give us an error. And I do get an error that parties assigned locale must match the price schedule's currency. So let's change it back to USA price, and now it should succeed. So now we'll make another assignment for our Australia buyer organization. Okay, now we have both of our assignments created. We should now be able to log in as each user and view that product, but with a different price depending on who we are. So I'll go ahead and sign in. I'm impersonating the Australia user. And if I go and list my products, I should now see this product, product 1, and I can see that it has this price schedule for our Australian price as expected. And then if I switch over to our USA user and list products for that user, I should see that that user sees this same product, but with this price schedule and this currency. So everything is working as expected. All right, let's talk about tax. So taxes are obviously a very important thing and something we want to get done right, and something that varies quite a bit depending on where you are geographically. So if you're over in Europe, the tax laws are quite a bit more simpler than they are here in the US. It generally varies by country, but within a country, it's a single flat rate. And so in those kinds of scenarios, when you're working in a European country or just somewhere with simpler tax laws, it might be something that you'd consider hand-rolling your own tax calculation code, and that would be appropriate. On the other hand, in the USA, there's a much more complicated tax landscape, right? So taxes vary based on where you are geographically within the United States, sometimes even within the same city. Taxes vary based on the products that you're purchasing. They vary based on what kind of tax entity you are. And so taxes can get very complicated very quickly, and generally not something that you want to roll your own code. There are services that I would recommend using if you're operating in the USA. And some of those services are Avalara, TaxJar, Taxify. I'm sure there are more out there, but generally you're going to be better off relying on one of those services to do those calculations for you. So the tax calculation bit is kind of outside of the realm. That's up to you how you want to do that. But we're able to obviously set that tax on an order. And there's two general strategies for doing that. The first that I'll talk about is kind of the old school way of doing it. And that's simply updating order.taxcost on the order directly. And you can do that if you have a certain security profile role called override tax. And so generally what you'll want to do is you'll want to give that role to a back-end user, and then your front-end buyer application will call out to your back-end, and then that back-end user that has that elevated role will be able to make those updates on the orders for your buyer users. So that's kind of the old school way. In recent years, we've also added support for a feature called integration events. And integration events are dedicated plugin points that occur during checkout that allow you to do things like update tax. One of the integration events specifically is called Order Calculate. And Order Calculate will get triggered basically anytime anything about your order changes that would require a new order calculation. And so let's say something changes about your order. If it does, then OrderCloud will call out to your custom endpoint and ask it a pretty simple question. What should be the new tax cost on this order? And in that endpoint, you're able to then call out to a tax service if you'd like, or if you're in Europe and you want to calculate tax yourself, you can do that as well. Whatever the case may be is you simply return the tax cost that should be on the order, and OrderCloud handles the rest. The benefit of this is obviously that you don't have to decide when to call that tax calculation. It happens automatically anytime something about the order changes. You also don't have to really worry about updating the order. You just respond to OrderCloud with the new tax cost. And thirdly, when you use this method, you're hydrating this thing called an order worksheet that contains everything about the order that happens during checkout, including things that aren't usually captured. Things like shipping estimates, or you can include tax documents. All of that stuff is in one singular place. So that kind of covers all I wanted to talk about in terms of regional tax. I'll now hand it over to Rob, and he's going to finish our topics with multiple regions.
Thanks, Crhistian. So now it's time to take a look at the final one of these three scenarios, multi-region scaling. This is the current setup that Sitemovebox 51 have today. As we said before, they've built their site to leverage Sitecore's OrderCloud. It's an Angular application, hosted in Azure, using Azure Front Door to serve out their application. They can quite quickly start to serve out more and more regions from here due to the global nature of OrderCloud. It is designed as a globally available API, so it really is simple to start adding more regions on. And Sitemovebox 51 can start to scale this out really simply to every region they want to work in. But as we mentioned previously, we have some regions where they have these strict data sovereignty laws. One of those, for example, is Australia. When working in the medical industry, like Sitemovebox 51, you need to ensure that all of your data is stored within Australian shores. So this approach here won't work. For this scenario, we're going to stand up a new instance of OrderCloud hosted in an Australian data center, and we're going to serve that from Azure as well. In this way, we can have our main globally available storefront still serving the rest of the regions, but our Australian one will remain solely on the Australian shores. We can use GeoIP filtering to ensure traffic from certain IP addresses and certain locations goes to the correct storefront, and that we're abiding by all legislation that we need to. So what I want to do now is just show you a quick demo showing how easy it is to go and stand up a new OrderCloud marketplace in a specific region of your choosing. Okay, so I've loaded up Sitecore's OrderCloud. And when you first log in, this is the view you're going to be greeted with. If we look at the data displayed here, we can see I have some marketplaces already existing from previous projects, but I need to create a new one now. I need to create one based in the Australian data center that allows us to adhere to those data sovereignty laws we've been talking about. So I'm going to click on this new marketplace button. And by default, usually when you create a new marketplace, it's going to default to the Azure US West region, but that's not going to work for us. We need the Azure Australia East region instead, so we can make sure all of our data is onshored in Australia. After that, we're going to have to populate a few things in here. The environment's been chosen for us, but we need to enter the marketplace ID. So let's just call it Sitemovebox 51. We'll give it a sensible name. And then we'll copy and paste that into the marketplace name as well. Now that's completed, it takes us straight over to the details of the marketplace. And if you look at the top here, you can see it says its region is in Australia East. So that's the initial setup complete. Really, it only took a couple of seconds and a few pieces of data. And from here, we can start to go and build out this new region. We can start to go and populate its data. So first of all, I'm going to go over to my API console, and we'll start by double checking we're in the correct sandbox. We're working in the Sitemovebox 51 region. And now we can start to use the API console to build out our data. I'm going to start by creating a new buyer object. And let's just call it Rob the buyer, that'll do. And we'll copy that into the name as well, and then we'll send that post request basically to create our first buyer object in the database. You can see the responses come back. So now we can change over to issue a GET request, which will give us a list of the buyers. And you can see the same data is returned. We've started to populate our data based in this Australian region. And from here, you can basically run off and set this up exactly as you would running an OrderCloud instance in the default US West region. You can start to import your catalog data. You can start to create all of the different users who are going to interact with your site as well. You're now free to interact with this OrderCloud instance based in Australia in exactly the same way as you would any other OrderCloud instance based anywhere else. So you can see it is really simple to get this region-specific OrderCloud instance created and ready to go in just a few clicks.
In conclusion, multi-region commerce can definitely be complicated, and there's a lot of things to consider. But Sitecore OrderCloud has the tools and the flexibility to make your commerce dreams become a reality. Today we covered multiple currencies, how to handle complex taxation, and finally, how to support your data sovereignty needs by enabling multiple regions. Thank you so much for checking out our session. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to either Rob or myself.